All right, we are ready to move into our discussion. Benefits and risks of data sharing, the dairy industry perspective. And I'm going to hand things over to Liliana Fadul, who will be leading our discussion today. Liliana, thank you for being here.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. So yeah, as Chris mentioned, we're gonna do today a panel or a discussion about benefit and risk of the data sharing in the dairy industry perspective. Just a little bit of introduction. The data sharing is a common practice in the dairy industry, and the amount of data generated in dairy farms has increased as the use of technology increased in the recent years. With this, there also has been a rise of concerns about data transparency, data sharing, and data exposure. Currently, there is an ongoing discussion in the dairy industry about the benefits and risks associated with data sharing and concerns about the risk associated with data exposure. There are many layers and players involved in these challenges, so we hope that during this interactive discussion, we are going to spark the discussion about all of these challenges and also opportunities. And more specifically, we are looking at the motivations of sharing data, what are the potential risks of data sharing and the potential benefits of data sharing in the dairy industry. And hopefully we have some time to discuss also with some possible solutions. I just want to make sure that for the attendees, just feel free to ask any questions at any moment of the session. You can put it on the chat or just unmute yourself so we can do this as interactive as possible. So I also want to start, we have today a couple of invitees for this discussion. So I'm just gonna tell their names in order, I guess, that I have them on my screen. So if you can just give us like a brief introduction about yourself and what do you do, that would be great. So Annie, I had you first.
Hello, everybody. My name is Annie Royer. I'm from Canada, Laval University. I'm a professor in agricultural economics, and I've worked on 2 reports in the dairy industry, data sharing, data perceptions among producers, and so on.
Thanks, Annie. Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel Foy, the CEO and co-founder of Aggregates, and we're focused on integration and aggregation of data at the farm and ranch level. I'm based in Philadelphia, so don't let the Irish accent fool you. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have today.
Thanks. Jay.
I'm Jay Madison, and I'm the CEO of the National Dairy Herd Information Association and Quality Certification Services. And we're nationwide and also international group of collaboration. And we've been in the dairy data business since 1905.
And John? Thanks, Jay.
Yep. So I'm John Waller. I am a lawyer and I work in the research division in the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I'm sort of in this conversation because I'm kind of on the front line at UW in terms of bringing in the agreements that transfer data from providers to the researchers here at UW who have an interest in accessing and using that data.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all of you for being here and accepting our invitation. So let's just start with the discussion. So I guess the first question, and you can feel free to answer that one, it would be, what do you think is the overall goal behind sharing data in the dairy industry? So what's the benefit, I guess, like for the farmers or even for the industry to make this data exchange valuable?
Is it general to everyone, Liliana?
Yeah,
okay.
It's general.
I see it as building an asset of the data as an asset, and the farm needs to have some value returned on that asset. So how do we how do we create that benefit as an industry back at the farm level is kind of a key objective of ours at Aggregates and of interest. I don't just think for us as a business, but for the wider industry at large, how that benefits everybody. But it has to come under the respective kind of view that data ownership is back down at the farm level.
What about you, Jay? What do you think is like the overall goal about sharing data?
The overall goal of sharing data, the kind of the whole dairy system was built kind of on an open and a sharing basis. It started cooperative extension with the university land-grant systems, evolved to USDA as a convener and a collector, and it's evolved now into kind of a mix of cooperative association, private companies that work with the herds, the herd owners, and the herd managers, and so that open and sharing is something that has happened and continues to happen. But I think as we're evolving more and more into data privacy and data security, that's looking to be updated some. But the value and the benefit that I think Dan mentioned, it is a strategic asset for that dairy herd to be able to know and look at data and be able to use it for tools and decision making.
One of the internal thoughts we had on that question that we're being asked is, who is data sharing benefiting, and what are the particular categories of who benefits from the data? And obviously community, environment, nature, the animal, the farmer himself, the supply chain, what are those particular categories in the supply chain? And I guess what are we asking from the benefits from the producer's data that's produced at the farm level? Because there's a mountain of other data that's produced other than the farm too, that doesn't need to be all encompassed into the same bucket, if that makes sense.
I think the biggest interest in sharing data is really to get more powerful tools, to get different data from the different actors of the chains, that usually those data, they're not pulled together. But by pulling them together, you can get, like Mr. J. Madison said, more powerful tools for prediction, for decision making. And I think that's the main idea. And also for research, I think it's also interesting to have to pull data together. And eventually, when you get big data, a number of data from different sources, then you get big data, and you can evolve towards artificial intelligence, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we have an idea of what it's kind of the benefits of sharing the data. But like, maybe can you talk a little bit more of what you also mentioned it, Annie, about like developing better tools using different algorithms. But what other type of motivations, or like even like in the traceability, what other type of motivations does the industry have? Or if anyone like in the public also knows, maybe it's not even in dairy industry, but what also other type of motivations are there to make this data sharing a thing going?
Are you asking the question to me directly?
Yeah, you can follow up if you want to, yeah.
Well, like Danielle Foy said, I think it's not all the actors of the industry that are interested in sharing, first of all. Some of them are better off keeping their data for themselves. I'm not sure I understand your question though. Are you asking me to be more specific about what we can concretely do with this sharing of data, or
how can you do to get the people to share the data, or the farmers more specifically? If we want like the farmers, just because we know that having all this data and sharing all this data is going to be beneficial to some point from research or for the industry, but what is, like, for example, how can you convince a farmer to share their data?
they have to have a benefit from it.
I think we have to come at the problem as, almost at the industry and then the communal level too. The solutions we're trying to solve are kind of one data system or data set instead of an integrated data set. And the value of integrated data hasn't really been taken advantage of yet because it's been so disparate. But actually, when there's a report I just read today by Gartner in 2021 about instead of focusing on the value of the data, which so much of the industry, the kind of suppliers of the technology are focused on the actual intelligence that can be created from the integrated data set and returned back down to the farm. Now, that's a relatively new concept to what we've developed our current generation of data systems and tools to do. But that in turn allows for some element of new AI or machine learning services and applications to be developed that can then stimulate both from the farmer getting a reward from his data and data quality that's feeding into these algorithms that their farmers ultimately getting charged for, instead of it being just an open system where everybody's sitting on a data lake and not really understanding the value underneath that lake of information. If that makes any sense.
It does. If I may interject and maybe ask to the panelists, I do think, and I agree with everything I have heard, and there is a big motivation in added value for the farmer, for example. But we have had some experience that it's not always the motivation of the farmer that will move the whole system. So how we motivate also the industry, for example, to share the data along with the farmer, because the farmer could actually accept to share the data, but if the vendors of the industry make it very difficult to share the data, it potentially will not happen. And along those lines, the other thing that I think it's important to bring into this discussion is the fact that in other industries, sharing data is working, maybe not completely, but every day we use the apps, the internet, and we are sharing large amounts of data very efficiently in other parts. So how we can connect that with the dairy industry?
Victor, to respond to your question, in terms of protocols at the industry level, to even try and create bridges between the different technologies that are there, trying to have these conversations, and I'm sure you've had them yourself. I don't think there's a full realization around the definition of what integration and APIs actually are. And I think that needs to be greatly, it needs to come under a common definition of how we do that at the data level, and then focus on your IP, which is actually the insight or the algorithm or the AI machine learning as your principal kind of product. But that hasn't been how the technologies have set their stalls out to begin with. And I think you're also seeing this wave, like all the other technology revolutions, you get that first wave out the gate and everybody believes, but then they don't make the right decisions in the technology. And ultimately it takes some time for them to figure out and study, but then that incline can be quite large. And I think we're seeing that same kind of pattern in agriculture, and the second generation and third generation are going to fit into a more big data sharing with some rules and kind of guidelines and protocols around it, and then ultimately, benefit the machine learning and algorithm service industry and economy that will form out of that. To get there, I think digital literacy is something we're going to have to hugely increase. I don't see simplifying the systems down is going to benefit farmers. We have to tool them up like all the other sectors who are gone through this. And we haven't really done that to this point right now. We've tried to make the system simplified, but in terms of doing that, we've also, I think, affected our aims and objectives of these tools and the real kind of benefit of using them.
So if we change a little bit the discussion and we go more about like to the, I guess, the data ownership, the legal part of the data sharing, it seems like it's kind of an agreement, I can say, that like the farm that's generated, the data that's generated at the farm, it's owned by the farmer. But when the data is shared and when the data is transformed by a company, there is like a lot of legal stuff going there and terms and conditions there that are not always like very clear. So at that point, maybe you, John, can like help us a little bit here with the legal issues. But like from the dairy perspective, there are not like legal standards, but says what owns to who, which makes all the process a little bit more complicated. So I guess my question is, at what point maybe it's possible where these derivates or this data transformation is not longer owned by the farmer?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think it's relatively understood in the industry and sort of across industry that sort of the farmer or whoever is the generator of the data originally is sort of the owner of those individual items of data and the compilation itself. But then it does get a little bit more complicated when then it's being shared with others who are adding data or deriving data from that data set. And I think really that's where it does get a little bit tricky. And so I don't think in these agreements that are transferring the data, there's ever an expectation that the farmer will be conceding ownership of the actual data or the compilation of data to the person that they're giving it to. But then there is that question of, okay, well, then what happens with what the recipient of the data does with that? And that's usually something that's dealt with in the agreement, because just by the default application of law, it's kind of this convoluted area because like the individual pieces of data are protected by trade secret law in the sense that, the farmer or the industry or whoever generated that data derives some commercial value by that data not being generally known in the industry. Whereas the actual compilation of that data into a data set can be protected by copyright law. And so if in the agreement that's sort of governing the transfer of the data and the recipient's use of that data, it's really helpful if there's language in there that says, this is what the recipient of the data can do. So for example, it could say the recipient of the data can make derivative works based on the data by adding their own data or by analyzing the data and sort of deriving some knowledge from that. And then on top of that, it would also address then who owns that derivative work, which I really think is sort of where the value is in this arrangement. And I think that's where there seems to be not a lot of clarity in terms of, okay, well, the farmer provided the data, what, share in the truly like commercializable, valuable end product should they have versus the person who actually created that end product. And sort of by default application of law, sort of whatever new aspects were added by the recipient of the data would be owned by that person, whereas the underlying data would be still owned by the farmer. Of course, you can contravene that by the contractual language in the agreement and have the ownership be divvied up however they can agree on. But yeah, just by default application, there would be that sort of confusing joint ownership situation most of the time.
John, in terms of data ledging technology and non-fungible tokens and the application of it to data, and then being able to trace and track data against the ledger, how does that play into the legalities once data is processed through an algorithm or an insight? And let's say we still have, well, I certainly believe post-algorithmic data still is owned by the producer, because without the original data, that there is no insight. So, how does that implicate if we have NFT is my question.
Yeah, and that's an ever-changing area of law, and quite frankly, not one that I am the expert on. But yeah, it is related to just the question that we started with, was just what happens to original data ownership when it's derived and changed into something a little bit differently. And I agree. I mean, the true value is in that original data, because without it, I mean, nothing can be derived from. And I think that the law is still somewhat catching up to the technological reality that we're living in now. So it's not abundantly clear, but again, absent sort of language in the agreements that are making that original data available to the person then deriving things from it, I think just by default, the person who is sort of deriving that post-algorithmic, end product would be the owner of it. But again, nothing is obligating the producer of the data in the first place from giving it to that person. So that's where sort of the person who's holding the data really has the power at the outset to sort of decide how they want the ownership of that end product to look.
John, I'm just curious if there's an analog here with individual personal data. So with things like GDPR and right to be forgotten, I don't know this area, so I have no idea. But if you decide to extract your data from a service, say Facebook or something, are those derivatives, do they need to be updated to reflect the removal of that data? And would something like that be applicable with individual farm data as well, potentially?
Yeah, I think the implications of sort of the personally identifiable information, like the protected health information that's implicated by GDPR and HIPAA and stuff here in the US, it's a little bit different than the individual farm data. But in terms of scrubbing the aggregate that might be left in that, I mean, I do see sort of a correlation and an analog. But I guess I can't personally speak to how analogous they are in practice, unfortunately.
One thing that we've experienced, like I said, work in international, and a lot of the milking equipment manufacturers are based in Europe, so that creates some multidimensional of what has to be addressed. But just for example, the Netherlands identifies animal data as personal data, where we think maybe more typically name, address, something like that as personal data. Germany takes and uses a second example, that it is name and address, and it's people data, and animal data is not and can't be personalized. So that just shows, I think, a little bit of the diversity of when you're trying to look at it, and you've got a milking equipment manufacturer in Germany, and then you've got one in the Netherlands. That creates, and I can tell you, we've been working and looking at that for 18 months.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize that the Netherlands had that understanding of what is personally identifiable information. That's an interesting approach, and I'm sure it complicates things for you folks in industry.
And I'm curious about this Netherlands rule. Animal data is the same as personal data, so it can be regulated. I guess there are some regulations about personal data. Maybe in Europe, actually. I don't know, Mr. Madison, do you know what are the impacts of considering those data as personal data?
Well, due respect to a member of the bar that's here, it keeps legal people really busy having a lot of discussions.
I could believe that, and no offense taken.
I guess from the security standpoint, we definitely looked at GDPR in the architecture of, security and handling of data. But, our equivalent here was, and what's heavily, the engineers know what to develop is HIPAA. And we've kind of went to those levels, but modifying it to our specific needs and then growing out the application to our needs in agriculture, because we're, we're not humans at the end of animals aren't humans at the end of the day. But it's a good baseline to start with, I think.
But I'll turn that around on you right away in that humans are animals.
Mm-hmm. It's all one hell.
And I think that's an interesting, parallel to HIPAA, because I mean that is one of the opportunities that's looked at, is that every year a bank, health, insurance company or whatever, they either send you a HIPAA or a privacy notice, telling you something, and that was been discussed in the dairy industry, is that every year, do we need to supply that herd owner, it's the source of the data. Here's a list of the touches, that have happened, on your data that we're aware of.
So Daniel, just the following question with the HIPAA, are you right now kind of using that as a base point for something in aggregates?
Yes, so in terms of we're handling millions of data points from a variety of different sources. And in terms of the different sources, the different people who are handling the systems going in and out of the databases and the architecture we're creating, we are putting in that basic infrastructure. So we will have control and track and trace on the data that we're taking in from the disparate data systems, yes. And then that becomes, as Jay just said, something that can be potentially used as within your audits. But if we move to digital audits, that is the end.
Have you considered blockchain as an underpinning?
Yeah, that is the directions that we have to go. But I guess the part of this conversation is to really elaborate on how that's going to be done in the community to benefit, but also mitigate the risks. But yeah, that's ultimately where we've got to go. And I've mentioned NFT or data ledging technology for post-algorithmic processing, but it's the same application for data audits, whether that be for sustainability or for welfare or for your cooperative, and you have to prove your numbers. It's going to be, I believe, the same technology.
And do you think there is a different or an alternative technology to blockchains? Or that's kind of where the industry should go?
That's an interesting question, considering we have this issue of power, and that comes under, as its own topic. Yeah. I think, again, my whole looking at data as a value and as an asset at the farm level is, how do they use that to equip themselves to move into this kind of regenerative agricultural circular economy, not just within their community that they're providing to, but at the farm level. And, we have a huge waste and energy output at the farm levels. How can you marry that up to things like blockchain and become self-sufficient in delivering those type of technologies and your asset value? those are new areas of the innovation, I guess, sound a bit very novel, but I think those are where producers need to go, because they've got the byproducts that are on the farm other than milk, allow these technologies to be explored and potentially deployed in a way that benefits producers. Not, everyone else has to rely on energy coming from somewhere else. Farms are producing abundant amounts of it. They could be running this, carbon neutral, free for other people, making an income off it. So I think we have to kind of think outside the glass box on dairying and what we've got, and begin to look at the base resources that we produce, both in terms of primary and secondary products at the farm, and how we can utilize them in terms of a digital revolution.
There may be a lot of other parallels in terms of industries and the way they've moved their data to more centralized, even nonprofit aggregators to provide not just views at the dairy level, but get much more holistic views.
I agree, Andrew. I think that the infrastructure for data back at the source of data hasn't been exploited in any way whatsoever. And how does that reduce then data ledging technologies and NFT technology and crypto technologies all come under the same branch? That's going to be dramatically reduced if you can do it at the location versus off in some server farm somewhere else, and then having to keep a base log of that everywhere. Why can't that be back at the farm and its own base to where the data goes? And I think that's the exploration beyond just the software components, the certain hardware components that may need to go in at the farm level too.
I would agree with that comment. I mean, we're in the millions and millions of rows just in where we are, and we're just scratching the surface of what we're learning from the data.
Yep.
So if we continue this, we talk about a little bit more about that we're talking about HIPAA and everything, like all about like the risk of data sharing. So if we talk about data exposures, I know that in different industries that's kind of very dangerous. In dairy industry, it hasn't been like maybe there is like an example, but it's more related to land than for dairy. But there is also like a risk. So one of the options that you normally hear about when you are trying to protect data, when you are sharing data, is about data anonymization. But for many reasons, there could be possible, there could be not possible in the dairy industry. One of the examples that we know that is not possible is like when you are doing merging data from genetics and production, I guess that's like not a viable option if you want to anonymize data. But what I guess my point here is, what are other kind of risks the farmers or the industry are facing with these kind of sharing data, or maybe leaking data of data exposure when all this process, when the data is on the cloud and everything? Because there's, I guess, like going back to the terms and conditions that you, John, were mentioning, that's supposed to be at some point who is going to be the responsibility of that. If I share the data with X company or person, who's going to be like the privacy issues, who's going to, I guess, be responsible of that if something happens.
And I think the next question is there a balance and a quid pro quo for that sharing?
Yeah.
There are lots of, we know, anybody in the research community knows these databases go onto many PhDs and many projects, and is that truly known by the data owner, how long of a life or an archive that data is going to have? I've been following one since 2014, and it's probably made about 7 or 8 PhDs from that data set. So, it's not to say that it's not a value. There is a huge value there. We need to be getting this in the hands of PhDs quicker, but it's what's happening to it after year 1, year 2, year 3, and how many people are touching it. There's really no way of identifiably knowing that with all the disparate data systems. And then that's multiplied up by who has the data, the original source provider of this data system, them having a disparate system, and then what are they doing internally from the projects? Because in Europe, you know, if there, and these, a lot of the innovations are coming out of Europe, those are having strategic alignment with academic institutions that are doing the same and giving these data over to researchers to look at. And yes, it's anonymized, but it's still benefiting these companies that the farmer isn't fully aware of when signing up to taking these systems on. And I think there has to be, you know, I said it before, data ledging technology or NFTs or crypto are going to have to become a component of that to make sure that we can check back and the provenance of the data, no matter where it goes or where it turns up, because we're going to end up, and I think, in some legal issues otherwise further down the line as systems get more and more complex. And I agree with Victor's comment on, you know, other industries have been sharing data quite easily, but it's not the agricultural sector. They have created these tools, those tools for humans, for new industries, new businesses, and they've spawned out. We already have an established sector that need to take the tools on and flourish from them. And that's a little different, I think, than our original 30 years ago technology getting put into the business or social workspace or even the military workspace. We've got to try and make sure that centralization of the data doesn't also cause centralization of food resources and information away from rural communities. There has to be a balance of that. And I think somehow tracking the data balances that power out.
So I want to be careful because, you know, in the future, John and I may have a negotiation standpoint basis, but in the material license agreements that we are putting in place, you know, there is needs to be a specific purpose for that data set. And, you know, there is a life to it, you know, and that benefits both sides so that it isn't, you know, forever. And, you know, also we want to encourage that, you know, new data are there to refresh because, you know, there is some benefit in history, but, you know, cows herd data from 1970 may not be real correlated to 2022. And so, you know, getting the right time series is part of it. And so I think that's evolving, and that's you know, for both sides, it's for their, you know, due diligence and best practices.
Yeah, and that's actually something that UW has taken a pretty, not hard stance on lately, but one thing that we're really pushing for in our agreements is to have like an actual end date for that exact reason that you brought up. I mean, what is the value of data that's 12 years old and no one's looked at in 10 years? So what's the point of having that agreement still in place? And yeah, I think on top of that, it does encourage the refreshment of data and ensure that, you know, what you're relying on is up to date. So if we ever did run into that, I think we would actually be on the same page in a license agreement. So that would be positive.
Hey, we're done. You know, once you get a lawyer to agree with you, you hang up, okay? Because it doesn't get any better.
Don't hang up yet.
So on the flip side of that a little bit, you know, just from the research perspective, I know there's a lot of effort to, you know, kind of archive data sets and models and derivatives in a way that they're kind of re-accessible in perpetuity, which is kind of the opposite of what you guys are talking about, unfortunately. But there is a push for that. I don't know about it in dairy right now, but for example, working on a project in material science where they want to, you know, produce a DOI for the data set and the model that's derived from that. So people can go back and, I don't know, recheck it, validate that model wherever it's necessary. But is that kind of in, you know, is there a tension there with what you're describing, John, in the data agreements? And potentially what might happen in the future?
Yeah, so I don't think there's any desire to like completely obliterate the record of old data entirely. I think from like from a UW perspective, just from what I've experienced, the concern is we don't want like data sets to live on our systems indefinitely, but and then like lose track of what agreement brought it here and what obligations we have to that provider versus this provider, and then we integrate that data set with this data set that we, you know, and so it's really just more of like not accounting, but just like a keeping track of things concern. So it's not like we're going back and scrubbing the universe of the existence of that data entirely. It's just for our own purposes of like managing when we are doing those kind of collaborations with other parties or integrating multiple data sets.
I'm just curious, for example, with the example that Daniel put about data set that he has been following since 2004 that has like go like through a lot of PhDs. That's something that is controlled like in the agreement, or that's like just the agreement between like the university and the company, and then like the professor, it's kind of another level on the agreement.
So the academics who have close relationships with producers, and then the producers giving access to the researchers to the data, and then that researcher creating their own, you know, USB data set that gets used for multiple projects. That, you know, I've multiple cases of that where, you know, quite, you know, because at the end of the day, some of these researchers who invest, you know, get a project for tens of thousands of dollars, put the sensors in, put months of work collecting this data on some commercial farm, and then get all this other data. It's very valuable. And, you know, you see a multitude of different researchers produce great publications from those data sets, but they can live on and ask other questions. And I think they do live on and get asked other questions and produce other papers beyond their expected life expectancy. But I don't think that there's an awareness of an issue there, Lilian. In the first instance, it's still seen as a benefit at large that it's not an issue yet.
I mean, it is not common in the research academic environment to share data sets inside once they have been collected already, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the main concept behind is if somebody else can do further analysis with the data and find better results, let's do it. But I think you are raising an interesting point, because that should be established.
Right, but and how does a farmer see that he's benefited that? You know, would generate, you know, 2-3 PhD cycles on, still giving a benefit. And, you know, he may have choose that that's okay, but, you know, as we look at a monetary value of that, it shows that there actually is, you know, we just don't know what that $ figure is yet.
And there's a difference between the academic side of looking at this data, both, you know, individually and iteratively, as well as there is operationally, and what can we learn, not just from a particular dairy's point of view, but, you know, from a state or country point of view as to trending and just disease in general.
Yep.
And then who is the aggregator, if there is an aggregator, and what is the relationship between those who are supplying that data to that aggregator, and, you know, what are the relationships for the dissemination of that data, and who benefits?
Hello, everyone. I'm witness to what Daniel Foy said. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for such a fruitful discussion. Basically, I'm from India, and I am a witness to what Daniel Foy said. Basically, what in Indian university happens is that the students, they collaborate with the industry. So the industry funds the research of the student, and the student is able to access all the data from the industry. At the initial stage, the student thinks that from this data, he would do some research, he would work things out, and the objectives met from that data, from the research, would in a way benefit the farmers, the basic stakeholders that generate the data. But gradually, as he moves on, a stage comes when he no more cares about the benefit of the farmers. He is more concerned about his publications, about his projects, and about how he gains his impact in the scientific community. So do you think that there should be some capping on the use of data once a student or a researcher has an access to data from the industry?
There's a couple of interesting things that you raise up that I kind of scribbled down very quickly. You're right, the academic perspective tends to go down the papers, the funding, and use the data set as adequately as possible to facilitate those outcomes. On the commercial level side, we have, to prove a value from the system. And there's a kind of overlap that we're beginning to see that's not, just from the data that we have, that the biases, data editing, data cleaning from the academic side is being utilized in the commercial side, which then these databases go on and get used. But it's ultimately we're using cleaning, editing, and filtering to get the best cows or no missing files from the cows. And I've seen that in multiple wearable sensor reviews and publications where there might come in with a few million days of data points or a few million data points, and then edit that down to a few 100,000 of just clear 24-hour periods of 30 days. But when we try to look at that in the commercial scale, what is the validity of that if we're editing out on the research side? And that's something that we're seeing. But I do think there has to be probably some guidelines, let's say, much like with research papers, if it's any less than 5 years, there has to be some reasoning, or it has to be high value academic paper for its justification. But maybe we have to do that with data too. If an academic is using a database, beyond a certain age, there has to be justification for that. But also the editing and cleaning of that data should clearly be described in a coherent way that covers both the researcher's need, but also as we talk about them in the commercial space, because I see it all the time, research papers with filtering being used to progress commercial interests.
Is that really true? Because once data comes up, what you need to do before you analyze that, you need to undergo data cleaning. So once gradually you go on cleaning the data, the actual information, what was in the base data, that gets hidden, that gets separated. So that's the issue.
Yeah. And we need to be real, I think, about the error information and the cleaned information, and begin to say that out within their publication space, because it's not clearly mentioned just now. It's more like we look for the specific thing we're looking for. And
may I? We have a different way of doing things here at my university. If you want to get your fundings, especially public fundings for research, you really have to sign this. They call it a certificate of ethics, ethical certificate. And then everything is about data actually in this certificate. They ask you how many years you're going to use those data, where you're going to store them. And it goes really, really far. And if you want to use them after you publish, then you have to explain why, what you're going to do with those data, where they're going to be stored. And 3-4 years later, they come back to you and ask, okay, what are you doing with these data? Are either you anonymize them, or you have to destroy them. And well, we have this certificate. We have to sign. I don't know if all professors are doing it. I don't know if they respect it. I do. But it's a pity, because for a researcher, after 4 years, you have to get rid of the data. And sometimes a year or two later, I would have liked to have those data in my hands still, But they're gone. It's a pity. But we have those kind of rules for data, for researchers.
I think they're brilliant starting points to where we have to go, Annie. And I think that, again, how do we speed up the communication and connection between the source and the researcher? So those, let's say if it is going to stay for another 3 years or 2 years, there's a seamless digital connection to make that authorization continue and happen. You know, we have things like DocuSign, we have digital connection ways to authenticate certain online information that can be done with producers' data, but I think it comes back down to farm level data ecosystems and the responsibility being back down at the data owner. And again, bringing his level or her level of digital literacy up to be able to understand that and go, that benefits that academic department or institution and me positively. They can keep that information and they're a trusted source to have the information. I think that's a positive for where we need to go within our sector.
I would also ask to both of you, Daniel and Annie, at what point do derivative works change that data to not be what you started with?
Interesting question.
Again, that's a very long-winded, long-answered question with probably many iterations. And I don't really know how many iterations that is after analysis, but I do believe at least after the first analysis of any kind, that data belongs to the producer, and there has to be some value given in some way back to the producer for the raw and then the output from the first Excel kind of insight or algorithm or machine learning. And then from there, you know, if someone wants to use it for a secondary point, then there's a market then to connect into that, or an in-kind connection that can be created to use it to create benefits beyond the second processing of the data, if that makes sense.
There are a number of industries who have solved this problem that might benefit our view of what we might consider, you know, paths to look at in terms of not just the housing of the data and the funding of those who provide the data, but also what happens to the derivative works. And that may help us. You know, HIPAA is certainly a good starting point for how we look at, organize, and protect the data. But I think there are a number of other industries and their maturity levels of how they handle data on a a daily, and sometimes even hourly basis that may apply to what we do.
I completely agree with you, Andrew. We're on the path to getting there, but we do have to come back with a more first phase before we even get to that. We're not at 24-hour data collection at the moment with the current infrastructure that we have. Across all of them, all categories, we have to try get them at least to that point integrated, and then we can start looking at more than 24 hours down into the hours, then into real time. And then I think these specific questions open up to what the potential of a farm-based data ecosystem could be.
Some of us are pushing that edge.
Yeah. I think it depends on what a lot of what we talked about, what the definition is. We've got dairies that are, sending data every 10 seconds, every minute, once an hour, 5 times a day or whatever already. Is that on all data? All is a big term, but on a lot of sensor data or event data, that's moving. And I think that what we also come around to is that if you've ever been in Buell, Idaho, the internet signal there, if you take and put a piece of aluminum foil on your hand and face the sun and turn around 3 times, you might pick it up and have a stable connection. But, our broadband width in a lot of areas where big dairies are is part of what's going to have to also be addressed to get that connectivity. So, data are collected, but then they've got to be moved into the data flow. And a lot of systems, may only keep, 2 days or 7 milkings, in a robot. That's all that's kept, and then it's replaced. So if you don't capture it or take it out, it's gone, it's overwritten.
What happens, Jay, if we keep that system going and we apply intelligence to it, and then after, I've experienced it, the internet went down in California because of bushfires for 6 weeks, and estrus detection only worked in the cloud, and it didn't actually work anymore. So, when we run into these scenarios and we've then applied all this intelligence and it stops working, we need to create a system that is redundant in being able to allow us to continue. And we know power is going to pop back up, but the power will run the computer that's going to process local intelligence to the farm. And I think we need to look at the infrastructure, right? Like rural Idaho and the connections there, even with satellites and fiber, could have an incident where we don't have connection, but the cows have to get milked, we have to get some health alerts in, down cow alerts in, and they're going to have to be processed locally. And I think, if you take a leaf out of someone like Tesla's book, where they're putting supercomputers into cars to drive, are we going to have to go to that level with farms so that they can do this, reduce latency, reduce the disparate connections to the cloud, and allow continuous processing of information, reduce latency, and a redundancy there should something happen.
So the economic sustainability, the cost benefit, the return on information, not investment, but return on information. Dairies are pretty resilient, and if there's key stuff, they go find a paper and pencil and make it light up, and because they're still producing milk. So you got a hole, in your data. It's not perfect, and so the balance or the analysis of it. But then you got Victor and Liliana. We come up with predictions or calculations or adjustments for data that are missing, because you got 2 points on either side of it, and you can come up with something to cover that. The sun will come up tomorrow.
And the cows will get milk.
Well, yeah, if they don't, that's another whole problem. If the internet goes down and it can't run the robotics, there's unhappy people. You can get your generator going, but if you can't get your software going, that puts you in a whole different, you got to hope your parlor is still there and you can put those cows through it.
So Daniel, just to kind of turn that back on you a little bit, I'm not entirely sure what aggregates does, but I'm curious if from your perspective, it's financially viable to move that inference onto the farm itself, if there are issues with that in terms of, I don't know, exposing IP or something like that. Obviously, operational mechanisms have to happen, like feeding the cows, but is there a huge cost to that missed estrus detection that you described, and is it worth the work to get that inference moved to on farm instead of doing it on the cloud or something like that, in your opinion?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question, Stephen. But the our goal is to really work with farmers and their disparate data systems to somehow bring them all together into a usable data system that allows us to apply independently developed intelligence. And that can be developed by the community. It's not our interest to go down every illness or condition and try find a model for it. That's the beauty of trying to integrate it back at the farm level and then opening it up to the community in a way that allows us to create an economy out of it. Secondly, I think that with some of the data that's coming in and what we're handling and from these, what I keep calling first generation systems is, looking at wearables, for instance, we're breaking it down into the file components that are transferred every single day, rather than trying to focus on estrus detection, on lameness. It's what is actually the file packet load, and then what is that quality coming off the sensor every single day, and then how does that affect a estrus detection or a lameness detection algorithm if you're missing, in a day there could be 90 packets, file packets per cow. If you're missing 30 of those, how does that affect an estrus detection quality? If you're missing one, how does that affect? I don't think we've really got to that level of the outputs yet and quality of the data that's going into then the output and validity of the algorithms. But I think that's where we're really interested in working with producers to really unpick and understand, and then work with the necessary parties to apply new types of algorithms to an integrated data set that is potentially more accurate. I can't say, because that's up to each and every person who's working on things, and it can be always improved upon. And then the more variable data you bring in, the higher quality, obviously, and validation you'll get on those specific analytics. Does that answer your question, Stephen?
I'm going to challenge you a little bit, because we get into this discussion, is that you said, well, it's going to be more accurate. Well, it isn't going to be more accurate because your data that you have is accurate. What you have is more volume of data. And so it takes and gives you a different robustness.
And I think part of it depends on your ability to compare that to ground truth.
Right.
And as long as you can do that and your ground truths are solid, then I think it's not just robustness, it's actually better data. Right.
I think in that scenario, Andrew, with milk meters, and what we're seeing is, slippage from the flow, and how do we get a correction on that? And some of the systems that we're working with do routine testing on flow. So how do we take that in and use it within the data? And that's the kind of ultimate chasing that we're at aggregates to add in to the data set that doesn't really exist right now for some of the customers that we're working with.
Well, and also, to your point about inferencing, edge inferencing, can be just as effective as cloud inferencing. And just because you do cloud inferencing doesn't mean you shouldn't do edge inferencing. And in fact, to speak to the notion of, the whole fragility of your ability to touch the cloud, that's where having inferencing at both places really protects you.
Yeah, I think it's going to go even further than that, Andrew, down into the fog. We're talking about, we thought edge was a starting point, and really believe that is a key infrastructure at the farm level going forward. But then the fog level after that is as critical for, I believe, for the individual animal and how we exploit that in the chain. And then that creates the security all the way up to the cloud, and then secures the ownership and the application of intelligence to this, one system. And for me, I think someone mentioned earlier about we've been connected as a community and dairy farmers in the past. I don't think anybody wants to change that. It's more about how do we understand where it's going, measure it, manage it, and have accuracy in there. And that's going to come back down to some element of controlling how and when it goes off the farm and visualizing that throughout its life.
A little bit of a follow-up question, Daniel, with the quality of the data. How are you planning to do that? Like farm by farm?
I think we want to go out the door and become a fully software as a service platform from day one, but obviously somebody's got to go out and do all the grunt work to get there. And yeah, it is going to be farm specific, it's going to be system specific. And we really, as a agri-tech community, have to come together and understand how that sharing and interaction is going to be. I think there, for someone like Aggregates, we don't supply a technology. We're solely focused on the farmer. I think that's going to be harder for other members of the agri-tech community to justify an independence and then the products that they're selling. But sorry, to answer your question again, Lillian.
Yeah, I was asking like if you were going to do that farm by farm, like that.
We're system by system right now and learning, how we just get that into a centralized ecosystem. I don't think there's a quick way. There might be some useful tools in handling the data we can create using or Databricks to speed it up and getting it out quicker. But it really is, it feels like we're in the trenches at the moment trying to wrangle all these systems for specific producers and projects and then try meet their data literacy levels. I feel like sometimes we're felt like we're coming in to solve all their problems when in fact we're just here to work with them on data, and that's going to take their interaction with us to what systems they're using, how they're using them, what their objectives are on farm and as a management team, and then how does that ultimately filter into reports and active outputs for them that are going to have value.
So on that system you mentioned, Daniel, and I mean everyone is welcome to respond, I guess. So you do have the issue of the company producing the system and the issue of the farm somehow entering the data, right? So is there in the plans also to educate the farmers or have some standards for data collection?
I think you'll see some systems like farm management programs that have migrated to some of the cloud platforms and are, they do have some of the management features built in for inputs and error inputs so they can minimize errors. But they're, paper-based inputs creates errors. It's something we're going to have to migrate from. But, integrating data doesn't mean a better system for input can't be created. And the more systems that are integrated, the less manual input we may have to do. And I think that's something we're constantly assessing as time goes on is, well, what does need to be inputted? What can be captured? How do we capture that so we don't have to keep relying on the human to do entry that should already be done and captured in the database and pulled back up when it's needed versus always being re-entered and an error occurring. But I think there are going to be ones that's going to have to be closely maintained by an interface that's tracking the user entry, and they are there. If you put in a T instead of a 1 or a 10 instead of a 1 to 9, those things can save a lot of issues. And I think that's a whole space in terms of the sociology and psychology of using interfaces at the farm level. And Nina von Keyserlingk said, I think about 2 years ago, even in the welfare space, she's learning more about humans than she is cows sometimes. And I think that will be the same with data.
So part of what we're talking about is again the production economics, and what it comes to is what's the quality, and the denominator is cost, and that goes to the question, how good is good enough?
I think on that, Jay, on the brands that are coming out, like Neutral and say Fairlife, and you'll see more brands come out with USPs under their what they're trying to sell their milk or dairy products for. And it's going to come down to how do they also prove that too. So we're going to have this need to meet the farm up down to where the producer or the retailer, the processor, and the consumer want. And ultimately, those proving that we can meet those standards in those unique product categories, whether that be neutral milk, which is sustainable, or you're welfare friendly, or you're a combination of those, we can't greenwash those. They have to be proven. And I think data is a key part of proving that. And we need to, throughout the supply chain, always have that in mind, that that's our aim and objective. Otherwise, we can create a bigger issue here by mismarketing, I think, too.
I think that's what I was kind of trying to go to, is that how do you validate so you don't have unsubstantiated marketing claims?
Yeah. That's a lot of hard work at the front end, improving data quality at the farm level, and then integrating that into the supply chain and what they want to show the processor, the supplier, and the consumer at the other end. I think it's possible. It's just going to take academic institutions and a new breadth of bringing digital literacy, digital tools in that are going to help with some key areas. And I guess what are some highlighting out maybe some of the key data points that are going to feed into that to give us an immediate benefit from a variety of different systems would be a good starting point that farmers could say, well, I have this, I have that, I can be at this, I can give those data points, and I can prove that I'm at that standard right now too, and then work on bringing 1, 2, and 3 in over the next year, 2 years to further prove that, where they are with their standards and quality of their products.
Daniel, tell me one thing. To what extent do you expect non-response from your respondents while data collection?
In terms of, I don't really understand that question.
I mean to ask, like, to what extent do you expect non-response from your respondents? Like, they might not be willing to answer your questions or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of uphill battles with industry in trying to get them to see the value of allowing the farmer to integrate their data, because they've built their models and business plans from a specific intelligence or a specific product that the sensor's doing, not in an integrated data ecosystem type of way. They haven't built those models. So we have some systems that are really willing to speak with us and engage, and they tend to be some of the newer and novel technologies that I think want to move in that direction. We've got some larger companies that also want to move there, but there's hesitancy. They still see the silo of information that they have as, in my mind, their data, and that they don't want to give that up because they don't know what value they're potentially going to lose. So that does create hesitancy. But again, I think it comes back down to us as an industry clearly defining engagement protocols that benefit the industry, how the farm owner is implicated in those things, around the data ownership. Clear marked understanding of those will help us build the steps on the ladder to ultimately get into where we all want to go in data sharing and be secure, not just from who's using the data from a capital standpoint or gaining value from it, but just from a cybersecurity standpoint. I think that's becoming an even greater threat as we move forward. Our food industry and COVID definitely highlighted that as an issue, and we need to somehow understand that on a quicker basis, how it's affected. I look at the Irish tax system that's digitized now, I think 15 or so years, and their ability to come in and react to incidences is not at the end of 12 months, it's within 30 days. And how do we get to those type of situations with agricultural data is going to be get us secure us and allow us to have new tools that are exportable and add to the economy in beneficial ways.
Daniel, your comment about COVID and its impact on society is very interesting, because I look at the action that is causing on the logistics industry, who for years has been putting off these same sets of decisions and has been siloed and protected and using many of the same words and descriptors that we are in talking about dairy and our sensor data and the like. And what's been forced through COVID is government intervention to force them to work together. And that was the same threat that forced the airlines to centralize their data in the mid-70s, was the threat of government intervention. And I wonder if we're going to wait for that, or if we're going to try to lead this instead of wait for that kind of action.
I think the opportunity is in leading it, Andrew, especially for agriculture. I think we're a really unique case at livestock and agriculture, and that unique user case can spawn out new technologies, new abilities beyond what's capable in the human space right now, because of the limits of handling people's data. And I think our need to secure the supply chain will be faster and more easier than human side of data. That will allow us to advance and again, new technologies. And that is a huge opportunity that we're at the potential cusp of, and we've explored the first generation. Now we've got to look at other sectors that have went through that same first generation and then mold it to specifically what we need. And I was speaking to some colleagues back in Europe earlier in the week, and a lot of hoping that Microsoft and all these other companies are going to come in and solve these issues for us. And I was kind of like, no, we have to take their tools and make the most out of them and may evolve past them.
With all due respect, Microsoft is always a fast follower. They never lead in anything.
They buy up innovation. And if we look at large companies and the history of large multinational companies, they've had to buy in innovation, and they don't do well turning a large ship when things need to happen. It's usually the smaller companies that build there first, and then one big ship may turn and actually take the market.
As a lot of people say, they lock into the taillights of those in the lead and overtake them.
Yeah.
Well, we are approaching to the end. This was a really interesting discussion. So maybe we can take the last couple of minutes before we end, just to make, I guess, the end remarks for the home message of this discussion. I don't know, Annie, do you want to start? Or well?
I don't know. Well, I think we're going to have to meet again, because we didn't discuss everything we were supposed to. There are many initiatives of data sharing platforms in Europe that I looked at, and I would have liked to share with you, but we don't have time anyway. And some of them are really interesting in terms of, okay, I'm a producer, I agree to share my data, but then if the data is to be shared again, then you have to check if you want that. And if you check, then you have to check to whom it can be shared with, researchers or another company, whatever. So I think those platforms are quite interesting to study. But anyway, concerning today, I think we had a really interesting chat. And although I am not a specialist of data, and I learned a lot actually. And I also think that maybe here it's a little bit different than where you are. So I'm learning how you guys are working, or what are your questions, and maybe next time we can share more. And yeah.
Thank you, Annie. Daniel.
my focus is the farm and ranch level, and I kind of had 3 take homes where the data as an asset for farmers and producers. I think that's going to benefit rural economies and communities, into the future. I think digital literacy and digital data literacy are our tools to really getting there. And I think in designing an incentivized system for all members of the, specifically for producers and ranchers, but that benefits everybody else in the community is super important. So we can speed up our knowledge base, our research, our ability to improve at the farm level, and really achieve our core aims and objectives on farm within the time frame that we really want to set ourselves out to get there.
Thanks, Dan. Jay?
So I think Daniel did a really good job. Data is a long-term asset. I'm going to change a little bit because I think there's maybe kind of a public perception or a broad perception. We talk about digital literacy. I'm not so sure that it isn't digital gold or digital oil that we're, kind of creating a big upswell. And, you talk about the incentivization, and, you talk, what's the value proposition? And I think every point along the supply chain, blockchain, supply blockchain, whatever we want to call it, the first thing they ask is, what's in it for me? And how that question is answered is going to be a lot of, how everything goes forward and how we get that collaboration and cooperation, trying to make it so that it works for everybody and nobody feels that they're at a disadvantage.
Thanks, Jay. John?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty clear from this discussion that from like a legal perspective, it's kind of the Wild West right now when it applies to like sharing of agricultural data. And I think until there is, a more well-defined sort of legal framework under which the sharing and derivation of this is more formalized, I think that that's unfortunately kind of the world that we're going to live in for now. And I think the main takeaway for me, at least, would be, a lot of this is determined in the contracts. And so I agree that it is partially digital literacy for the farmers, but it's also like agreement literacy, like making sure that they know what is in the agreements that they're using to share their data, whether there is an agreement at all. And I think until there's a HIPAA or GDPR like framework that agricultural data falls into, it really is going to be kind of an ad hoc, case by case, contract by contract determination.
And make the people read the terms and conditions and understand them, because we
Right.
normally don't do that.
Yep, definitely.
A question, is there going to be, I know this is the part of the Bazaar festival more so than Dairy Brain, but is this something that outside the CIN that maybe Dairy Brain's going to continue as a discussion group, or how do we go after this event?
That's an interesting question. One thing that Liliana hasn't announced yet, but probably this is the time to announce, she's leaving us at the end of this month. She's going to Lactanet. You want to say maybe something, Liliana?
Yeah, well, I'm leaving the Dairy Brain at the end of February. I'm going to Lactanet in Canada. So for the ones that they don't know, Lactanet is kind of the DHI equivalent in Canada. So yeah.
So we are still
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Still counting with the CIN to remain alive. We will need to restructure a bit, but discussions like these, I think, are very fruitful. So we will certainly take into consideration that we have been recording this meeting. Hopefully we're gonna write it up and share, and that hopefully will spark further discussion. And that would be a good point to follow up with the CIN.
Sounds good.
All right, well, we are at the end of the hour, and I want to thank everybody who presented today. This was a fascinating conversation, and thank you so much for being here.